there. This is from a watch that doesn't work anymore, so I like to save all the buckles and bands and little hardware. Here's a piece of light gray leather that I'm going to use to make this stud bracelet. So it's a little bit longer because you want enough to be able to sew over and around the bracket. I'm not sure what that's called, the buckle, and then enough so that when you add a couple of holes, it can feed through the buckle and then lock itself under the band so it doesn't get caught on things. So I'm just folding it in half to give me a line, a center point, and then I'm going to clamp them all together. I normally could do this if I'm looking at it, but I have to flip it over because the conductive thread is in the bobbin, so I do need to clip everything pretty precisely because I can't necessarily see where the center point is. So that's the conductive thread. It's the 2-ply stainless steel, and that's a pretty heavy upholstery thread. So the experimental part of this whole bracelet is there's no soldering. So I don't have access to this stuff except on the weekends. So I just wanted to see what happened and see how far I could get and see how resourceful I had to be. So right now I'm just stitching just a single line up down one side and then I'll do the other. And as we'll see later, it wasn't quite enough for conductivity. I need a pretty bulky line there. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting back about 1.5 inches because this is where the buckle will be, which is metal, and I don't want that conductive. If it touches things, I want to be able to stop my connection. And so that's the hole for that to go through, and then I just stitched that down, just trying to clear off all the little metal hairs so it's a pretty clean edge. So I'm taking out the conductive thread and just putting just a color that sort of matches the gray. Or maybe I didn't care that much. I just wanted to get it done. And just trying to figure out, based on my wrist size, where I want the holes to be. Generally you want a couple of holes, so I think that's what I end up doing. And again, removing about 1 inch, 1.5 inches of the conductive thread that I had previously sewn. So that seems to fit pretty well. Whoops. It's kind of hard to put those on. Yep, that's good. Alright, so we're ready to go to the table and start experimenting with the LEDs and see if we run into any problems. So I want to make sure I checked all the LEDs because I actually started doing a couple and the LEDs weren't functioning. So I have a bunch of LEDs that don't work. So I found a bag. These are all good, I think, but I just test each one before I put it. So I'm just testing it on a Gemma with a 3.7 volt LiPo battery, just to check the connection. So remember, the conductive thread's just on the underside where the LED legs are. So I'll bend them up and see where we're at with connectivity. So that's okay. It's a little wobbly. I was going to run some conductive thread by hand, but as you'll see, I've decided to do just a couple more lines of thread. So it's at this point that I decide that I want to stop and reevaluate what I've done. So back at the sewing machine, I have to put the conductive thread back in. So I'm going down, then up, and then I think I probably, okay, so that's 2 rows. So it's a total of 3 passes from the previous one, 3 passes of stitching on each side. So that will make it really bulky and should be plenty with a little bit of pressure from a backing pushing in to make a good connection. So I'm going through the stitching holes with a really hefty needle to make it easier to push all the LEDs through. It's kind of hard on your nails, so if you actually just flip it over and push the big part of the needle through just by using a table, that makes it a lot easier. So I think I put 10 LEDs total on. So this is a backing. So it's the same stuff, just the leather. And so I'm cutting a piece the same length as the LED run and maybe adding a 1/2 inch on each side so that I can connect one or both of the leads under there after, just to glue everything down, and it will give it an extra run of the connective wire on each side, just coming from the other side. So this is where I'm stitching 2 more lines of the conductive thread, so that it's at on the bottom of this strip, and I'll glue that down on the back of the bracelet. Oh, I guess I did 2 lines. So I'm just cutting off the LED leads. This isn't really supposed to be a weapon, so I don't really want any of those sticking out. The strip got pretty curly after I sewed a couple lines, because the stainless steel thread is pretty rigid, and so it kind of has its way more so than the top thread. But it doesn't matter. Once you glue it down, it's pretty rigid. So I'm just putting a bead in the middle just to separate them, and I don't want to cover the conductive thread, because that's not the point of this. It's just a way to attach it to the bracelet and give an extra push down of the conductive thread, since I'm not using any soldering. So I just let that dry for a couple hours, and I had to let my battery charge. So then I need a way to attach a battery. First I'm just checking all these sharp things just to trim any. So I pulled back, as you can see on the edge. So that's where I have access to the 2 lines of conductive thread. So I need to figure out a way to put a battery in there. The coin battery is too big with the holder, and it's just not really powerful enough, and it's a pain to do the whole attachment setup. So the 3.7 LiPo is a pretty good option. I need to put a resistor in there, because I think this is where I test it and let it sit for about 10 minutes. And obviously it's going to get warm. It's but as you can see, it's a pretty strong connection. So I found maybe a 160 ohm resistor and put it in there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and it was pretty good. It stayed cool, no problems. So this is where I've come back and just felt it and seen if it was cool enough, and it was. So I think my battery ran out, or I deleted something because I don't have the video where, so I glued the resistor into the top line, which is the positive, and I've cut this video too. So what I did was I cut half of that negative lead, and I stripped about a ½ inch. I fed it underneath onto the bottom row, glued that all, and then just kind of bent everything just to experiment the best way to put this battery on. I guess I wasn't really focusing the camera too well, so that's all glued. Yeah, I guess it's being glued now. Then I came back and here it is. So I missed the step about gluing the battery and wires down, but it's permanent. It'll last a while, and it's just something fun to wear at night. It's just an experiment. So you just plug the resistor right into that hole. I forget what that thing is called, so I just called it Mary, and it works.